types of elections. Finally, we go to a constitution. Is this constitutional? Now, in Maine, the most recent case, U.S. Judge Lance Walker, a Trump appointee, decided this absolutely was constitutional. This absolutely did did provide for candidates or voters to have their choices heard. It's also been decided by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which has jurisdiction over Alaska. Finally, we get into problem 3, dark money. Now, dark money means funding that comes in where the voter has no ability to know who the true source is, so the person who earned or inherited that money. Now, how they do this is they set up an intermediary, a PAC, a super PAC, a special interest group. What they do then is donate and get their friends to donate to this intermediary or shell company that then looks at Alaska and says, well, that's a cheap date. I'll go up there and spend $1 million and I'll never be connected to it to influence Alaskans' votes. Well, the problem is that when they spend this money in the state of Alaska, their name is never disclosed to Alaska voters. All you see is apple pie for America or voters' right to do blah, blah, blah. You never see the true source. You never see the individual's name who earned or inherited that money. And so what we're trying to do is shine a light on that true source. And another way of looking at this is the true source is that smallest doll right on the right-hand side of your screen. When that true source donates to an intermediary, it goes into the next doll to the left. And then that intermediary donates to another intermediary, further hiding the true source. So it goes to the left again and goes to the left again. And finally, the big one, of course, the biggest state in the union, the state of Alaska, and that's what we see. We never see that smallest doll. We never see the true source. And what the ballot measure 2 is doing is making sure that when the $16 million since 2014 gets spent in the political industry, we make sure that we know where it is being spent. You know, a lot of people want to talk about donors and this and that. Well, this campaign is aimed at making sure that voters have the right to know, and they further attain that right to know who is spending to influence their votes. And so the solution, 81% of Alaskans agree that we need more transparency in our campaign finance disclosure laws. This would bring Alaska to the top of the nation in terms of campaign finance disclosures. And what it would do is require campaigns to disclose the true source of contributions. Both donors and recipients are required to disclose contributions greater than $2,000 within 24 hours. Any group receiving more than 50% of its funding from outside of Alaska must include that information on a disclaimer in all communications. And people like to turn to Citizens United and say, well, we can't limit dark funding. We can't limit this money that's coming in. That is true. We cannot limit the amount of funds, but what we can do is shine a light on the true source of those funds. When Citizens United they struck a decision on it, it was a 5-4 decision, very contentious and very controversial. But what Justice Anthony Kennedy said in the opinion as to why they decided what they did on this case, he said that this is all going to be okay, because states' disclosure laws will be the disinfectant for this funding corruption. Well, it's been about 10 years now, and we still haven't seen updates in many states for campaign finance disclosure. And so what we're doing is a simple update to our finance disclosure to keep up with the times. You know, we can't do anything about this Supreme Court decision at the moment, but what we can do is make sure that voters and reporters in the state of Alaska know where people's funding is coming from. And so finally, this is the Yes on 2 for Better Elections campaign, and we've gone through 3 problems: broken primaries, winners without majorities, and the influences of dark money. We've provided 3 solutions, and they are encompassed in a common sense reform, which is ballot measure 2. And now we'll open it up for questions and give you our contact information so that if you don't get your question answered, please let us know. And I believe we have Scott Kendall on the line now, and we can go forward.
Great. Well, thank you for your presentation. And I think I'll jump right in here. Scott, can you hear us? I think you're on mute, Scott.
Yeah, excuse me. I was actually answering some of the questions in the chat. Apologies.
Sorry, we're gonna actually read all of the questions from the chat live, and then get live answers so that everybody can hear them. So
even better.
Yeah. So the first question is: does the Yes on 2 campaign qualify as an out-of-state funded entity under Section 15.13.400? Parentheses 19 of your initiative? If not, how do you avoid it with the amount of out-of-state money used to fund this campaign? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand you've raised for your campaign somewhere around $3.5 million. And if I understand what I've heard correctly, almost 3 million of that has come from outside sources.
Yeah, so if the question is, has Alaskans for Better Elections got a majority of its funding from outside the state of Alaska, that is correct. For that matter, the No on 2 campaign has gotten something like 98% of its funding from sources outside Alaska as well. What we have done is on our website, we actually over-disclose. So under the current law, we could disclose merely the political groups that have donated money to us. We've gone the step further to say, these are the donors that donate to those groups, because we're kind of trying to live the world in a transparent way, that we believe the world should be under ballot measure 2. Of course, ballot measure 2 hasn't passed yet, so no one's under these restrictions, but we are absolutely dedicated to the fact that our money is going to be light money, so to speak, that even if it's not required, and of course on our disclaimers, we have to report who wrote the checks on our ads because we're required to by law. But if you go to our websites, click on disclosures, 100% we are being transparent, quite in contrast to our opponents, to be honest.
So then the other part of that question was, does the Yes on 2 campaign qualify as an out-of-state funded entity? And if not, how do you avoid it? How are you avoiding that?
Well, as I said, ballot measure 2 has not passed, but yes, ballot measure 2 has accepted funds over 50% of its funds from outside the state. So there's no avoiding it. No avoiding anything. In fact, as I said, we're actually disclosing more than the law currently requires.
And I'll follow up to that and say that we've also raised the most amount of individual Alaska donations from individual Alaskans, more than any ballot measure in the state of Alaska in the past decade. And so there's a lot of investors into this campaign from the state of Alaska who care quite deeply about these reforms, and it's awesome to receive the amount of support that we have from right here.
So you've answered one of these questions already, Scott. I'm going to read this so that we can hear what your answer is live. California has a primary use support, but unlike your promise, they still have negative campaigns. Why do you think it will be different in Alaska?
Yeah, that's actually a misconception, and that might be due to our opponents likening it to California's system. Our current system is much more like Alaska's. Our current system is much more like California's system than what ballot measure 2 would do. What California has is they have an open ballot, they have an open primary ballot, but they have the top 2 going on to the general election, and then a plurality vote against those 2. We don't propose that because, you can end up with something like what California's got, where you end up with 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans on the ballot, and you're actually limiting choices. Our system is top 4, and it's got the ranked choice voting element. And so you have to build coalitions of support, and you have to build you have to run solution-based campaigns. So California's got its own system. We don't agree with it. We're not proposing to do things the way California does. We frankly think we've got a much better way of doing things.
So you've answered this next one privately also, but ranked choice voting has helped drive California to be effectively a one-party state. How is this helpful to giving voters any real choice?
California does not have ranked choice voting. California has a top 2 primary and then a regular plurality election like we have in Alaska now. So I tend to share some of the writers' critiques of California's system. I think that they have in many ways not made the right choices. They've eliminated political diversity, where the system we propose with the top 4 and ranked choice voting actually encourages political diversity, encourages third parties.
All right, thank you very much, Scott. So why are outside interests spending so much money to change our election process in Alaska? Alaskans for Better Elections reported receiving $500,000 from Unite America, a Colorado-based organization devoted to encouraging ranked choice voting and nonpartisan elections nationwide. Since the start of the year, most of that organization's funding has come from 2 people, Catherine Murdoch, a moderate member of the family that founded Fox News, and Mark Merrill, co-founder of the video game company Riot Games. The financial information was first reported by Alaska Public Media. Why do you think that the outside sources are giving so much money to your proposition?
Yeah, so you know the answer to that question is a little bit of the story of how this ballot measure came to be. This ballot measure wasn't written by anyone outside the state. It was written by me and a few others in early 2019. To be perfectly candid, we had no money to run a campaign. We just had an idea. I've still got the original Word document on my computer. But what we did then was we met people, we networked, and we asked, you know, like an entrepreneur, we went around and said, we think we've got a really good idea. Will you support that idea? And we found there is support. I think, you know, the motivation is there's a lot of philanthropists who believe partisanship is tearing our country down. You know, you look at the numbers and 60+% of Alaskans think the state's headed in the wrong direction. 60+% of Americans think the country's headed in the wrong direction. And there are people just worried about partisanship, and they look at Alaska and they say, hey, maybe they can lead the country in a better way. They've done crazy things like elected a senator write-in. They've done things like had an independent governor or a third-party governor. And so it's an investment, I think, in the idea that we can move beyond partisanship. What's a little bit disturbing is kind of the clear financial interests that the supporters of the no side have. For example, the RLSC, which is a dark money organization, we don't really know who donated money to them to impact Alaska's elections. Well, they dropped $250,000 into Alaska's primary elections, our current closed primary system. They dumped money in to take out certain incumbents. Now they're dumping money into the no on 2 because this ballot measure would take that control away and give control back to the people. So, you know, we can't speak for the individual motivations for all of our donors, but they have donated to groups that are really just trying to foster bipartisanship and solution-based politics instead of politics of destruction. What's going on the other side is frankly disturbing.
Okay, so this initiative, if passed, would mandate that I vote for all 4 in this scenario. Why should I have to vote for 3 people that I dislike as a candidate? And if I don't, my ballot is then thrown out on round 2. What's your response to that?
My response to that is, again, that's another misconception. The ballot measure very specifically says, if you wish to vote for only one candidate, you can do that and your vote will count just as it counts now. So you do that, you're giving up the option, if your candidate happened to be in last place, to have your vote transferred to your second preferred choice. But if you show up and you vote for the first place candidate, your ballot will absolutely count just as it counts today. And in fact, that fact is so very clear that even the summary of the ballot measure that was written by Attorney General Clarkson and the Department of Law, who attempted to keep it off the ballot, they wrote a ballot summary that says in the ballot summary, if you want to vote for only one candidate, you can. So have no fear. If you are a purist and you wanted to support who you support, then absolutely this ballot measure is not going to impact your choices one bit.
Well, I think there must be some confusion about ranked choice voting then, because everything I've read about ranked choice voting says if you don't vote for all four, your ballot gets thrown out.
That is true. That is something that the No on Two campaign is falsely advertising, but it is. I would invite you, and perhaps we can even drop a link to the state's own ballot summary, in which you will see it says if you want to vote for only one candidate, you can. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think if there's a misconception out there, all we want is for voters to get the best info and then make up their mind.
Okay. So how many other states have adopted this election process?
Yeah, so one state has adopted it, and that's Maine. 22 cities across the US have adopted it. Australia has used it for the past century. Ireland's used a form of ranked choice voting for a very long time. But more closer to home, actually, the Alaska Republican Party and the Alaska Libertarian Party teamed up in 2002 to pass ranked choice voting on the ballot. They had a ballot initiative that was ballot measure 1 in 2002, and they set out to pass ranked choice voting. Now it's interesting that the Republican Party or Republican officials have come out and said they don't want this to pass now, but we have history with ranked choice voting on both sides of the aisle. The Alaska Democratic Party used it in their presidential primary, which is run by the party in the state this year. They saw double turnout, just like every city in the state of California and every city in the nation. After they passed ranked choice voting, they found that it increased turnout, just like they found with open primaries. And our opponents like to say that more cities and more states have repealed it than passed it and kept it. Absolutely not true.
Well,
5 cities have repealed.
I'm confused. I thought Scott just told us that California doesn't have ranked choice voting.
Cities in California. Municipalities. 4 cities across
so whereas
California
the state of California doesn't have, the state of California doesn't have, but cities, does that mean a lot of the cities or just a few of the cities in California?
Just a few of the cities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And so the other thing to note is that, the opposition says that more cities and states have repealed this than have passed it and kept it. Absolutely not true. Only 6 districts that use ranked choice voting then repealed it. They repealed it because of that confusion that we had earlier, because they passed earlier versions of ranked choice voting that did force the voters to vote all four candidates, or all however many. The cities that have then gone on to pass it still have it. In Maine, the Republican Party and other special interests tried to repeal it. It's failed every single time. With the 3 times that they've tried to repeal it, the repeal has failed. Utah's Republican Party and Utah's Republican governor have come out and said, we absolutely believe ranked choice voting is the way of the future and how we get our voters to have more voice, choice, and power in our elections.
So with that then, has a Republican been elected in any city or state that does have ranked choice voting?
Yeah, so a form of ranked choice voting, actually, this is a fun one because it's pretty historical. A form of ranked choice voting was used at the Republican Party convention in 1860. Ranked choice voting gave us a little known president by the name of President Abraham Lincoln. In caucuses and parties across the United States, especially here in Alaska, our state Republican Party uses majority voting, so you have to get over 50%, for 36 different types of voting procedures in their party rules. They use a plurality only 4 times in their party rules. They know that this is the best thing for the operations of their party, and same with both parties, but we believe it's the best thing for the voters of Alaska.
So hasn't the system you're proposing already been put in place in other states besides Maine? And if so, how would that mean that Alaska leads the nation, will lead the nation? I think that was a statement you made a little bit earlier. It's this
Yeah,
person's
yeah. So
question for that.
what hasn't been, ranked choice voting has been accepted and kept in place by many places in the United States. Maine is the only state that uses it statewide, but many cities have passed it. The entity that we're proposing here with the open top 4 primary with no ranked choice voting, plus ranked choice voting in the general, plus strengthened financial disclosures. This is a revolutionary election reform. We would be the first to pass it in the United States.
Great, thank you. So when you say that Alaska is unique in electing a write-in senator, that we elected an independent governor, et cetera, doesn't that show that our process works just fine?
The answer to that is not quite. The answer to that is that Alaskans, when they see something going off the rails, can stand up and in a sense, move mountains. But when you look at, for example, look at Senator Murkowski's write-in campaign. So she got 39%. Her Republican opponent, Joe Miller, got 35%. Her Democratic opponent, Scott McAdams, got 25%. Very easily, that campaign could have gone either way. But if you look at where Senator Murkowski, I think it's fair to say in that campaign, came down in the middle between those two candidates. Now, if either of those candidates on either end of the polarized spectrum had won, and again, Senator Murkowski beat the odds in winning a campaign without even her name on the ballot, you'd have had a result that was opposed by 75% or 65% of the state. 75% of the state or 65% of the state would have preferred someone else. And so the fact that Alaskans did something that has only once before in our nation's history been done, and actually was the only time it's ever been done in the face of opposition by the two parties, shows no, the system has built barriers. The system has built all these barriers with a closed primary system to the actual will of the voters. When someone loses a primary election, for example, Senator Coghill up in Fairbanks, he has lost his primary election. Lifelong public servant. His father signs the Constitution, another lifelong public servant. He lost his primary election. 5.9% of his constituents voted against him because of that closed primary system, low turnout that divides Alaskans into two different ballots. So who speaks for the other 94% of his constituents? Shouldn't they at least have that on the menu when they get to the general election? So I think what Alaska has been able to do in extraordinary circumstances speaks to sort of the independent streak that Alaskans have. 63% of us not affiliated with either major party, but the system remains. It remains that even though they collectively only have about 36, 37% of the state affiliated with either of them, the Democratic and Republican Party are gatekeepers to the ballot. They own 2 slots on the ballot. No one else owns those. And so it's sort of what Alaskans have done in spite of the system that shows the need for change.
Thank you, Scott. So what percentage of errors in voting due to a large restructuring of the ballot system do you expect in year 1? There has to be some analysis on this initiative by your proposing this initiative. Please note a minor change was recently made on the state ballot that initiated litigation due in part to voters possibly being confused on which party the candidate was running for. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and with that, we can look at the state of Maine really quick as to the first year that they implemented ranked choice voting. The first election that they had under ranked choice voting, 99% of the voting population were not confused. They filled out the ballots absolutely correct. In the first year that Portland, Maine instituted it for their municipal mayoral election, 94% of the voters surveyed said they completely understood, were not confused whatsoever by the ballot. And so what we find is that, voter confusion leading to ballot exhaustion. Ballot exhaustion is something that we have on with our current system, and accounts for about 1% of ballots being thrown out every year. In Maine, it was less than 1% of ballots that got thrown out because someone filled in two bubbles in the same column. It would be just like if you filled in two bubbles in the same column under our current system. What's insulting to Alaska voters is what our opponents say is, Alaska voters won't be able to figure this out. It's too confusing. Absolutely not. I look at both of my neighbors who are an 86-year-old woman and then an 84-year-old man and an 86-year-old woman, and I say, yep, they can count to 4, and then I look at their yes on 2 signs in their yard. Absolutely, people can count to 4, and it's insulting that people would say we can't. Scott, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think a little more directly, I think responsive to the question, because I think you're pointing out, there was a last minute change to our ballots, and there was a lot of concern, of course, about candidate confusion. And I think you raise a larger issue of, because of course we're going to have 2 years to educate the voters of Alaska how this system works, and we're very confident that the Division of Elections will do a great job with that. But I think the question kind of raises kind of this handful of issues that Alaskans always struggle with. So currently with this new ballot we've got, and to be clear, the statutes don't dictate, super specifically exactly how the ballot will be set up, and so hence the confusion. But this year there will be people running, candidates running, and they're a libertarian, can't have the word libertarian next to their name. The voters will go and they'll pick up a ballot, they won't know what that candidate is. Only the Democratic and Republican candidates will have any affiliation next to their name. So there's this confusion factor. There's another confusion factor in the fact that because parties own the slots on the ballot, they can engage in last minute swapping out of candidates and have done so even in this election. All of that ends with ballot measure 2. Ballot measure 2, a candidate runs, they tell you, I'm a Republican, I'm a Libertarian, I'm Alaska Independence Party. Whatever they say, that goes on the ballot. They can identify themselves, that goes on the ballot. The voters get good information, and no more of this nonsense with parties swapping candidates on and off the ballot, no more of that. Just good people running, the top 4 go onto the ballot, identified as they wish to be identified, and the voters choose.
All right, thank you. This next question, I'm having a little difficulty deciphering it. I'll read it, and I'm not sure what they're really asking. So many of us don't like bundling of bonds or issues. I know the Supreme Court said that you could. Why are you afraid to give the voters choices on each of these important and separate issues rather than forcing an all or none choice? So I'm not quite understanding the focus of that question. Is either of you able to enlighten me with that?
Yeah. I think the writer there is gesturing at the fact that initially this was filed about this time last year, I guess, maybe August of last year. And Attorney General Clarkson said, nope, it's got 3 different subjects. It violates the single subject rule in the Alaska Constitution. And so they attempted to kick it off the ballot. We went to Superior Court, we won, we gathered our signatures. We went to the Supreme Court and we won. We had a very spirited back and forth on this issue of, is it 3 subjects or is it 1 subject? Ultimately, the state Supreme Court, by unanimous decision, said election reform is 1 issue. And so that's the legal answer. But I sort of want to get to the writer's other point, which is, why couldn't we select these things separately? And the answer to that is they are 1 continuous system. For example, if you were to just enact top 4 open primaries by themselves, that doesn't end the spoiler problem. Say you've got 4 candidates running in the general, you've got a Democrat, you've got an independent, you've got Republican 1 and Republican 2. Well, if it's a plurality system, you still have the spoiler effect. You still have, Republican 1 and Republican 2 fighting over the same votes, and likewise often with the Democrat and the independent. And ultimately the voters might get someone who wins with 28% support. And that's not representative, excuse me. So the ranked choice voting is necessary to take those 4 choices and then make sure that the support at the end is from a majority of all voters. Now, likewise, if you put the ranked choice voting measure out there without the top 4 primary, it also couldn't function because you really have two parties that have automatic ballot access. So most of the time you'd be ranking two choices, and ranking two choices not going to be, there's not a heck of a lot of effectiveness in that. So those two just kind of, they're one system, even though it seems like two processes, because a primary and general election are our election system. With respect to the dark money aspect, we found that to be a necessary outgrowth of what we were doing, because in a world where, necessarily the parties, if they don't have ballot control, they have a little less control. We didn't want voters who go to the ballot and are accustomed to, well, I'm just going to vote straight Ds or straight Rs down the ticket. Now that it's going to be even more important that voters stay informed. And as we've seen with this growth, the ongoing growth of dark money in our elections, Alaskan voters need good info. To make good decisions, you got to have good information. And so we also found it kind of part of the system to say, okay, in this new world that more represents the independent spirit of Alaska, we also really have to make sure that someone's not coming in with a money bomb at the end of an election, disparaging one candidate. And gosh, if the voters had known, that money really came from their opponent's grandma or something, it might have impacted whether or not they believed the ads. So it's kind of a long way of saying it, but we think all of these things are interconnected and necessary to a healthy democracy.
Okay, so it looks like we have one more question here, and that is, would it not be better to try an experiment, say in one House district in Fairbanks, to see how it works and how people feel about it, as opposed to changing the entire state's election process?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest, whether the state constitution would even allow it to treat one district. We have certain requirements in our state constitution that, of course, geographically, you can't discriminate in Alaska. That being said, so if this passes, of course, there'll be a 2-year period while voters get educated. And the very first time we will all be presented with this system is in August of 2022. We'll engage in that open primary, then we'll engage in that ranked choice voting. And if Alaskans find that, okay, that worked okay, but we wish there was 5 choices, it can be amended after that 2022 election. It can be changed by the legislature. It can be changed by future ballot measure. But I think reasonably the legislature could come in and they could tweak it, they could change things. But we expect to see what we saw in Maine, which is Maine enacted it. Frankly, the legislature tried to take it away from them multiple times, and the people actually filed referendums to prevent it. Once people had those choices in that system in hand, they wanted to keep it. Maine being somewhat similar to Alaska in that a slight majority of them don't affiliate with either party. We're much more independent here, but a similar profile. So we strongly believe this is a big step forward. If it's not perfect, of course, it can be amended and tweaked after the 2022 election.
All right, well, thank you for joining us today, Scott and Shay. Well, it looks like we have one more question. We'll take this one real quickly, and then we'll wrap it up. So this will disenfranchise voters who have a candidate they want to support as opposed to other candidates on the ballot. If they don't vote for a candidate, they do not want their ballot to be tossed. How is this democracy and a free expression of one's voice? You've already answered these questions, sort of, but would you offer as a justifiable answer to these disenfranchised persons for having their votes dismissed? What would your response to that be?
I'm not sure I quite tracked the question, but the simple answer is no one's ballot gets tossed. Everyone's ballot gets counted, whether you vote for one candidate or 4 candidates. And that tabulation is recorded at every step. So I suppose if you're imagining the person who votes and says, I only want to vote for one candidate, I think that's what the question's getting at. I would pose the question, suppose it's a 3-way race and they want to vote for one candidate. If they vote for only one candidate in the current system in a 3-way race, and their preferred candidate is in last place, their vote now does not impact the outcome. How is that different than our system, which actually gives them the opportunity to have some say between the final 2 candidates? So it's quite the opposite of disenfranchising anyone. It's enfranchising everyone. Everyone has the opportunity to both make their sincere vote to vote for their very first choice and then decide whether they have any preference between the remaining candidates. It's not mandatory, and their vote will count just like it counts in the current system. So there's no disenfranchisement at any level.
Okay, well, thanks for taking a shot at that last question, and we'll wrap this up. Thank you for joining us today and giving the yes on two side of things. We heard the no on two side of things last week, so it's good to hear both sides. Appreciate your time. Before we leave today, out of all of our attendees, we've only had 9 people take the survey, and we need just a few more people to click on the survey, which is over. If you click on the chat box, you'll see there's a link to click on. It's a quick survey. It'll take you 30 seconds. We're just trying to test the survey function of this webinar process. And we really do need to have some of our attendees click on that link and fill that survey out. So really appreciate it if you could do that. Please join us next week for a presentation by the CEO of the PFD, Angela Rodell. Have a great day, be safe, and please wear your masks. We are adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a great one.
You too. Are we still live?
Yeah,
Okay, are we getting anybody clicking on the survey?
that's what we're gonna stay on until I look again. So
Yes.
give me a second. Well, we went from 9 people to 20 people.
Awesome. Well, then that's great.
Yes.
We
So
have
thank you.
enough. We have enough now to be able to tell if the survey works for us.
Yeah. And we put a bunch of different types of questions in so we could test all of the different
Yeah.
answer formats. So
Yes.
thank you for everyone who took the time to fill it out.
Yes, thank you. And we will see you next week. I'm out of here.
Bye, Charlie.
Bye.